This is a big one. Maybe the biggest one. Perhaps the greatest game ever made. It's called objectivity, folks. Get used to it. Okay. If it's not the greatest game of all time, it's at the very least the greatest for the Nintendo 64, though I would be willing to fight you on that previous point. This is another game that impacted me in its own special way. It opened up my mind to the possibility of adventure on a larger scale than anything I had experienced up to this point. To be fair, my only reference was Mario 64, which is a fantastic game and will be featured in a future video. It also showed a deeper element of exploration and story than anything I had played up to this point. And while I have since played Final Fantasy VII, I never owned a PlayStation as a kid, so I wouldn't play that game for many years. The game I'm referring to, and the subject of today's video, is none other than The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. I have an incredibly vivid memory of the first time I ever played Ocarina. It was at one of those little kiosks that they set up, usually in the electronics section of stores like Target or Walmart. A lot of places still do, which is really cool. But this particular one was at a Toys R Us. Rest in peace, Jeffrey. I stood before it in awe. Honestly, there may or may not have been rays of light emanating from it, with a heavenly choir exclaiming its glory in the background. I had read about the game extensively in my very first issue of Nintendo Power magazine.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
It's depressing how many of these things just don't exist anymore. And here it was, available, free for me to play. I looked around as if to ask, seriously, I can just play this? Well, I mean, if you insist. I then went on to have a near life-changing experience until my mom came and pried the controller from my hands. I even remember the exact moment in the game I picked it up. It was in the Hyrule Market early in the game, and I just ran around marveling as the lively, vibrant music filled the air and the townspeople moved in their predetermined motions. But to my 11-year-old eyes, it was so real, such a populated, lived-in world. I then moved towards Hyrule Field and just stood there, my jaw dropped open in complete and utter awe. Gobsmacked, even, one could say if one would use such words. Surely this was the pinnacle of man's technical achievements. It was so vast, so real, so perfect. How could they ever top this? Have you played an N64 game recently? What? What is that? What is this imposter? Where's the game I remember? I absolutely played this game with our current gen graphics. It's crazy how your brain gets so accustomed to new graphics that it makes old stuff look like absolute trash. It's easy to ask, how did we ever think that this was good? Well, back then, it wasn't just good, it was the best. It's easy to look back and see how basic everything looked compared to the sheer jaw-dropping beauty we can create with modern graphics. I feel like I should also note there are diminishing returns the better graphics get. The jump from PS3 to PS4, while impressive, was nowhere near the same as the jump from the SNES to PlayStation 1 or the N64. At that point in time, we literally went from 2D to 3D, something we all take for granted these days, but back then this was mind-blowing. This was one of the most important advancements in video game history. I also understand that modern HD TVs do old games no favors, but I fire up Ocarina on my N64 or the GameCube release that runs at a higher resolution, and this technical marvel that once blew my mind almost makes me shudder. But that's for like the first few minutes until the game absolutely sucks you in. What it lacks in graphical beauty, it makes up tenfold in gameplay and story. And what a fun, epic, beautiful story it is. Now, the only real Zelda experience I had before this was playing A Link to the Past for the SNES at my uncle's house, well before I had any concept of what story was, and games were just that. Games. For the fun of it. Fun in the purest sense a child could understand. You moved your guy around and you fought monsters with your sword. Nothing else mattered. But in 1998, I was practically an adult. No, not really, like, at all. Okay, fine, maybe I was only 11. But I was able to understand what was going on. I knew that there was more happening than just combat. And at that age, this game ticked every box for me. Fantasy, magic, swords, video games. Man, it's hard to even describe what it was like to live through this and feel that anticipation. This game was so hyped. And even though I didn't have the emotional connection to the series, I knew I needed to play it. And yeah, some things still do give me that giddy feeling nowadays, and we're no strangers to hype, but it's just not the same. Ocarina was a monumental achievement in video gaming, and I could rave about it forever. It's so firmly cemented in my mind. A little while back, I got the 3DS release and played through it. Probably for the first time in over a decade and a half. And while it does maintain the N64 feel, they polished it up quite a bit. I mean, it's pretty much a complete graphical overhaul. That experience wasn't quite the same as playing it for the first time. But as I played, things just came rushing back to me. I remembered things I never even knew I remembered, but as it was happening, I was struck with that feeling of, oh yeah, that's right, that's how you do that. I didn't consciously remember remembering it, but knew what to do regardless. It's such a fun feeling, and really quite telling of how important this game was to me, that even to this day, elements of the game still occupy real estate in my memory banks, and probably will for as long as my mind functions. As I mentioned, it was released on the Nintendo 64, which remains one of my favorite consoles to this day, probably because it was the first that I bought with my own money. It made it all the more special. It was the fifth installment in the Legend of Zelda series, and the first in 3D. You play as Link, or whatever you name him. I always just put Link because that's his name, and you should put that. As I was saying, you play as Link, the boy without a fairy, who lives in the Kokiri Forest. Okay, quick aside, let's get this out of the way. All of my pronunciations are based on how I pronounced them as a kid. I've never looked up a proper pronunciation, but I know other people pronounce them differently, so I apologize and respectfully ask you to deal with it. You live in the Kokiri Forest, where no one ages, and strangers become monsters. You have a nightmare. It's dark and storming, and suddenly a young girl rides by on horseback, and then a sinister man appears. We cut to the great Deku Tree, who orders the fairy Navi, probably one of the most irritating characters ever made in a video game, to go and wake you up and become your companion, and eventually lead you to him. But, of course, there's this total douche who won't let you get through unless you have a sword and a shield. It's irritating, but it basically forces you to get some equipment and learn the basic game mechanics of combat and gameplay, and it gets you ready for your first dungeon experience, which we're about to witness. After you defeat the evil living inside the Deku Tree, he gives you a gem and tells you that he is cursed and he dies. After defeating the monster that lives there, Link is prompted to leave the forest and venture out into the wide, unknown world beyond. You have an emotional goodbye with your best friend Saria, and then you head towards Hyrule Field. This is where the game really begins. Everything up to this point has been fairly linear. Go here, do that, find the Lost Woods, get sword, get shield, etc. This is more or less all Link knows. He, like the other Kokiri, have never left the forest. This is his whole world. And since he's the one that we're playing as, it might as well be our whole world. Remember when you were a young child? The scope of your world was somewhat limited. Your home, maybe a neighbor's house, and if you had to travel somewhere to visit a relative, it would feel like a journey. I mean, at least for me. My grandparents lived about 20 minutes away, and every time we went to visit, I swear it felt like a road trip. Childhood is often a very contained experience, almost like your own little Kokiri Forest. And that's what the beginning of this game feels like. Until the Deku Tree tells you the history of the land and tasks you with stopping this great evil, and to do so, you must leave the world you know and venture out into the great unknown. I can't speak for everyone, but when I was a kid, when I would play outside, it wasn't just games and sports with the neighbor kids. I would find myself a stick and go on adventures. I fancied myself a knight with a sword or a powerful wizard with a magic staff, the trusty stick fulfilling whatever role was needed. It's no wonder this game resonated with me on such a fundamental level. The world of the game was the world my imagination already lived in. As I said, after your heartfelt parting with Saria, you head towards Hyrule Field. You're treated to this new, adventurous music. You go down this narrow, forested lane, and then the map just opens up before you, and you're blown away. Oh, gosh! I forgot about Kapora Gabora. Get used to this guy popping up every few minutes. I swear he gives Navi a run for her money on the annoyance scale. You can't skip it. It's you have to endure it. I love that. It's my favorite part. Although, to be fair, I do love his theme music. It's pretty fun. Anyway, the map just opens up and you're blown away. Or at least I was. Here was my make-believe world of adventure on the screen before my eyes, made real, made playable. I'm trying so hard to describe this experience because if you didn't play it or live through it, it's just gonna be kinda hard to understand. Even if you go play it right now for the first time, it's not gonna be the same. If you've played Skyrim or Fallout or The Witcher, or maybe even more on the nose, Breath of the Wild, think about the first time you ever experienced those games. The first time you experienced an open world game when they were new, something that you had never played before. It's an awe-inspiring moment. I think that's the best way I can try to translate this experience from, 1998 to the current day. Don't get me wrong, this is an amazing game at any point in your gaming career, but there was just something about experiencing it in real time as the world just collectively freaked out about it, and rightfully so. Many elements from previous Zelda games make an appearance here. Hearts, swords, shields, magic, some characters and enemies, with a lot of new fun things thrown in, like different tunics for certain levels, or awesome items like the hook shot, or the megaton hammer, or the big Goron sword. One of the main elements of this game is a focus on music. It is called Ocarina of Time, after all. Oh, you don't know what an ocarina is? Dumb. I'm kidding, of course. I had no idea what this instrument was the first time I played this game. But this is an ocarina. It's an ancient wind instrument. Broad strokes purposes, think like flute or recorder. Throughout the game, you learn songs that affect the environment or interact with secret things and eventually allow you to fast travel. All of the fast travel songs that you learn are named after different types of musical compositions. The bolero of fire, the nocturne of shadow, or the minuet of forest. This is another example of kind of like what I mentioned in my Eternal Darkness video, of video games teaching me things that I never knew. Other than learning what the hell an ocarina was, I learned about all these different types of music. Because of this game, I know what a prelude is, or a serenade, or a requiem. So when I played Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, I knew exactly what that meant. It would be a grave disservice to this game and anyone watching to not talk about how fantastic the music in this game is. From its very opening notes, the music digs its hooks into you, defying you to ever forget a single one of its melodies. Each of the songs you learn is so iconic, so memorable that, at least for me personally, I had a hard time playing it on the 3DS because I have the N64 buttons burned into my brain. This is how the Song of Storms is played. When you play the game and you play that song countless times over countless hours, how are you ever supposed to forget that? And this is to say nothing of the music that plays in every place that you visit. Hyrule Market. Kakariko Village. The infamous Fire Temple. They actually changed the music for later releases. There was some chanting in there that I guess was not cool. The Haunting Shadow Temple. Which to me is the Sound of Nightmares, but apparently that was okay. The soft, lilting Zelda's lullaby. Or the ominous organ music of Ganondorf's castle. My friend and I even made up silly lyrics to Epona's song so we would never forget it. Phantom horse, phantom horse, phantom horse is mine. We called Epona Phantom Horse because when you call her, she just comes out of nowhere. Don't overanalyze it. I was 11. When I got The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword for the Nintendo Wii, it came with a 25th anniversary CD of Zelda music done by an orchestra. It might be one of the coolest things that I own. It's actually been uploaded to YouTube, so I'll put a link in the description. It's so cool. There are few video game soundtracks that bring such a rush of memories like Ocarina of Time does. I feel like I could just go on forever about the music, but let's get back to the gameplay. At the start, you must find the 3 spiritual stones. You get one from the Deku Tree, you get one from the Gorons, and one from the Zoras. You need these 3 stones to open the door of time. Here you find the legendary Master Sword. When you pull it from its pedestal, you are transported 7 years into the future. If anything else in this game has failed to impress, that should do it. At least it did for me. I mean, just add it to the list. You find out that you are sealed in the Sacred Realm for those 7 years until you're able to wield the sword. During that time, you find out that Ganondorf has stolen a piece of the Triforce, the physical embodiment of the gods of Hyrule, and has taken over the land. As an adult, you must pass 5 temples, defeat the evil there, and collect the medallions needed to take on Ganondorf. Many of the sages, the protectors of the medallions in each temple, are actually characters that you meet throughout your journeys as a child. It's really cool. I don't even know how else to sell this game to you. I mean, it's just a phenomenally fun adventure with easy, fluid gameplay. Well, I mean, as fluid as the N64 can be. You try being precise with an N64 joystick. It's a nightmare. Beautiful, iconic music, memorable dungeons and bosses, unique items, and most importantly, fishing. This was so frustrating, but it was so much fun. My buddy and I would just spend literal hours here. There are also things to collect if you're into that more completionist playstyle. Gold Skulltula medals, largely optional, but the rewards are well worth it. From more health to expanding your wallet to carry more rupees to getting the Stone of Agony. Younger viewers may not recognize this, but the shape of the stone is actually the N64 Rumblepack. It was a peripheral that would plug into the bottom of the controller and it would provide a vibrating effect, something that's built into most controllers these days. When you have the pack installed and you come upon certain areas in the game, the controller would start to vibrate, signifying a secret that you could unlock by playing Song of Storms or one of the other various tunes. In the 3DS release, it is replaced by the Shard of Agony, which kind of looks like a tuning fork, and it actually makes a sound whenever you come upon those locations. This was my first real introduction to the Legend of Zelda series, and I've played every console installment since. I haven't done every handheld outing, I'm working on it, but you know. Breath of the Wild is the only console release that I have not beaten yet. I've played for several hours, and I think it is deserving of all the praise that's heaped upon it, but when I'm left to my own devices in an open world setting, I usually just get lost and frustrated. I wasn't using a guide, so I had no idea what I was doing or where to go. I think my next gaming goal will be to finally complete that game, or I'll just do the Link's Awakening remake because I can't focus on things. You may notice a trend in some of these videos of me kind of ripping on open world games. Don't get me wrong, I think that they're great games. I'm just really bad at them. And I think that's one of the things that constantly draws me back to Ocarina of Time. The illusion of this huge open world that's actually pretty limited. During my recent 3DS playthrough, I did the Big Poe challenge to get my final empty bottle. And while doing that, I became very accustomed to every location on the overworld of Hyrule Field. I better have. I rode around it like 100 times looking for that last stupid ghost. When I did this and took it all in as an adult, it felt so much smaller. I liken that back to earlier when I said, as children, our world is small, and we perceive the unknown as this grand, overwhelming thing. But as we get older and we're able to take more in, understand things more, maybe even literally see more of our world, it just doesn't seem that big or unknown anymore. That was my experience replaying it on the 3DS. It could have been the smaller screen, but I did all of this game capture on my GameCube, and I had the same impression. I was expecting the experience to be the same as it was in my memories. Expecting the same thing I witnessed 22 years ago. That tiny piece of the magic that lives so vividly in my mind has to, unfortunately, remain in my childhood, where it shines with such brilliance and joy. And that's the bittersweet reality of nostalgia. A taste, a glimpse of that perfect memory that can never truly live up to how it's remembered. There's a moment when you run into Sheik in the Sacred Forest meadow, right before you go into the Forest Temple. As you sit and look at the tree stump where Saria sat and taught you her song as kids, Sheik gives you this line of text. "The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. A thing that doesn't change with time is a memory of younger days. I think that's the first time I read that, and I completely understood it. Like Link, I had grown up, and the world was different. This is just another reason why this is a game that I will revisit time and time again for as long as I'm able, to access those memories and feelings that I had as a kid, and hopefully someday be able to share it with my niece and my nephews, or maybe even a kid of my own. You could make a case for better Zelda games, but for me, it'll always be Ocarina. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend on my silly video. I genuinely hope you enjoyed yourself. If you did, drop a like or a comment. Let me know your favorite memory of Ocarina, if you've ever played it, or what your favorite Legend of Zelda game is. I just would love to have you share your memories with me. Consider sharing this video and subscribing. Every sub just means the literal world to me. I am the Dark Numenorian, and until next time, keep gaming, keep rocking, and thanks for watching.